The air in the boardroom was thick with a smug satisfaction that didn't belong to me. My father, flanked by my mother and my brother, slid a single sheet of paper across the polished mahogany table. "It's done, Daniel," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "The board has voted. You're out." My brother, Leo, couldn't suppress a triumphant smirk. He was now the new CEO of the company I had bled for. The company I had built from nothing in my garage while he was still failing his business classes at a university they paid for with my money. They saw the company as their birthright, a golden goose I had merely been keeping warm for the real heir. They looked at me, expecting me to break, to beg, to rage against the injustice. But I just sat there, my hands folded calmly on the table. My silence seemed to unnerve them more than any outburst could have. My mother's smile tightened at the edges. "It's for the best, son," she cooed, a tone she always used when she was about to deliver a killing blow. "The company needs a real leader, a face for the brand. Leo has the charisma. You've always been more of a behind-the-scenes person." Replaceable, that's what she meant. I was the engine, hidden away in the dark, and now that the vehicle was running smoothly, they felt they could just swap me out for a shinier hood ornament. They thought they were just firing me. They had no idea they had just triggered the clause that would bankrupt them all. The smiles on their faces, so full of arrogance and greed, were about to be wiped away forever. They believed they had taken my future, when in reality, they had just handed me their own on a silver platter, all because they never bothered to read the fine print. They assumed my loyalty to them was greater than my loyalty to myself, a mistake that would cost them everything they had and everything they ever hoped to have. You might be wondering why a family would destroy its own legacy just to get rid of one of its own. To understand that, you have to understand the role they gave me from the day I was born. I was the spare part, the backup plan, the one they called replaceable. My life was divided into two columns before I even knew what accounting was. Leo's column and my column. Leo, my older brother, was the asset. I was the utility. He was the investment that was destined to pay off, showered with praise, opportunities, and endless financial support. I was the workhorse, expected to contribute, to sacrifice, and to enable his ascent. Our parents weren't cruel in the traditional sense. There was no overt physical abuse. Theirs was a quieter, more insidious kind of destruction, a slow, systematic erosion of my identity. They made me believe my only worth was in what I could do for the family, which really just meant what I could do for Leo. The pattern started early. I remember when I was 10, I spent an entire summer mowing lawns, pulling weeds, and washing cars for every neighbor on our block. I had saved up almost $200, a fortune to me then. I had a picture of a telescope I wanted taped to my wall, and I was just a few weeks away from having enough to buy it. Then, Leo decided he absolutely had to have the new video game console all his friends were getting. He didn't work for it. He didn't even ask for it politely. He just moped around the house, sighing dramatically until my mother's nerves were shot. I remember the conversation like it was yesterday. My father sat me down in his study, the room he used for serious talks. He didn't ask. He informed. "Daniel," he said, adjusting his glasses, "Leo needs that new Nintendo. We're a little tight this month, so you're going to give us the money you've saved." It wasn't a request. There was no please. When I hesitated, my eyes stinging, my mother added, "Don't be selfish, Daniel. He's your brother. Family helps family." They took my savings jar from my room that night. The next day, Leo was screaming with joy in front of the television, and my father clapped him on the back, telling him he was proud. They never mentioned the telescope again. I learned a critical lesson that day. My work would only ever be used to fuel his leisure. My dreams were disposable. My efforts were simply assets to be liquidated for the golden child. That lesson hardened into a rule as we grew older. The stakes just got higher. On Leo's 16th birthday, a brand new convertible was parked in the driveway, tied with a ridiculously large red bow. My father proudly tossed him the keys, while my mother filmed the whole thing, tears in her eyes, saying how much he deserved it. He hadn't done a thing to deserve it. His grades were mediocre, and his only job was to charm his way out of trouble. When I turned 16 a year later, there was no car. Instead, my father presented me with a work apron from a local burger joint. "Time to learn what real work is, Daniel," he said, with a self-satisfied nod. "It builds character." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Leo was building character by driving his friends to the beach, while I was building it by scrubbing grease traps after midnight. But I did it. I worked 40 hours a week while going to high school. I saved every single penny. I didn't care about cars or parties. I had a new dream, a degree in software engineering. My grades were impeccable, my test scores were high, and I had a clear path laid out. I thought that if I could just get to college, I could finally escape their gravity and build a life of my own. My bank account grew, a secret testament to my hope. The day I got my acceptance letter from my dream university was one of the happiest of my life. I showed my parents, expecting for the first time a glimmer of pride. Instead, I was summoned to another serious talk in my father's study. They told me how proud they were of my work ethic. So proud, in fact, that they knew I'd understand their decision. Leo, who had barely scraped through high school, had been accepted into a private business school with a hefty price tag. They told me there wasn't enough money for both of us. "Leo needs this, Daniel," my mother said, her voice soft and pleading. "He's not a self-starter like you. He needs the structure, the prestige. You can work for a year or two and save up again. It won't be a problem for someone so resourceful." They weren't just asking for my savings anymore. They were asking for my future. I didn't fight them. I didn't yell or plead. What was the point? Arguing would have just given them the opportunity to call me selfish and ungrateful. Protesting would have been framed as an attack on Leo's future. In their world, my ambitions were an inconvenience, and my dreams were subordinate to their plans. So I just nodded. I remember the hollow feeling in my chest, a cold, empty space where hope used to be. The next day, my father drove me to the bank. I stood before the teller, the withdrawal slip in my trembling hand, and I took out every dollar I had ever earned. The money I'd bled for, the symbol of my escape, was handed over to my father, who patted me on the shoulder and said, "This is the right thing to do, son. You're a good man." As I watched him walk away with my future in his pocket, something inside me changed. The part of me that had spent 18 years desperately trying to earn their love and approval simply gave up. It was like a switch being flipped off. The burning need for their validation was replaced by a cold, quiet resolve. I realized they would never see me as their son. I would only ever be a resource. And a resource doesn't need love. It just needs a purpose. I decided to give myself a new one: freedom. Leo went off to his fancy business school, sending back photos of himself at parties and football games. I stayed home. I kept my job at the burger joint, but my real work started when my shift ended. They had barred me from the front door of the university, so I built my own in the back. The family garage became my classroom and my laboratory. I used what little money I had left to buy old computer parts and used textbooks. Every night, while they slept, I sat under a single bare bulb, surrounded by the smell of gasoline and dust, and I taught myself how to code. I learned systems architecture, database management, and encryption protocols. While Leo was learning how to give presentations, I was learning how to build the infrastructure that ran the world. It started as a small project, an idea to fix the clunky, inefficient inventory system at my job. But in the quiet solitude of that garage, it began to grow into something much, much bigger. For 2 years, my life was a cycle of work, study, and code. I was a ghost in my own house. Then, one night, after thousands of hours of effort, it was done. I had a working prototype, a clean, intuitive, powerful piece of software designed to streamline logistics for small businesses. I called it Nexus. It was my creation, born in the dark, and I believed it could change everything for me. My first sales pitch was to Mr. Henderson, the owner of the burger joint where I still worked. He was a good man, constantly stressed about his thin profit margins. I offered to install Nexus for free, promising it would cut his food waste in half. He was skeptical, but he saw how hard I worked and decided to give the kid from the grill a shot. The results were better than I could have imagined. Within 3 months, his food waste was down by 40%, and his profit margin was the highest it had been in a decade. He wrote me a check for $5,000 and gave me a glowing testimonial. That check was the most valuable money I had ever held. It wasn't just payment, it was proof. Proof that I could build something of value, all by myself. Mr. Henderson told his friends in the local restaurant association, and suddenly my phone started ringing. A pizza place, a bakery, a small catering company. I quit my job and went full-time on Nexus. The garage was now a command center, overflowing with server components, networking cables, and whiteboards covered in code. My family barely noticed. When Leo came home for summer break, full of stories about his prestigious and unpaid internship, he'd glance into the garage with a look of pity. "Still tinkering with your little computer game, Danny?" He'd ask, before going out to use the car my paychecks had once helped maintain. My parents would express their concern. "We just worry you're not thinking about a real career, honey," my mother would say. They were completely oblivious. Seeing only the grease-stained son in the garage, not the CEO of a rapidly growing tech startup. That changed when I landed the Harrison Foods account. They were a regional grocery supplier with 12 warehouses. I beat out 2 established competitors for the contract. The first payment that hit my bank account was for $150,000. The next time my father opened our joint bank statement by mistake, the concern on his face was replaced by a look of pure, undisguised shock. The little hobby in the garage was now worth more than his entire retirement account. The discovery of my bank account triggered an immediate change in family dynamics. Suddenly, my tinkering was visionary. My obsession was passion. I was summoned to the study for another family meeting, but this time there was no condescension. Instead, I was greeted with wide smiles and an unnerving level of pride. My father, who had once told me to get a real job, now spoke of Nexus as our family's next great venture. He proposed a plan to make the company official. He would bring his years of business acumen to the table as chairman of the board. My mother would handle the human touch, and Leo, fresh out of business school with his degree that I had paid for, would be the perfect chief operating officer. "You're the genius behind the product, Daniel," my father said, leaning forward earnestly. "But every genius needs a team to handle the business side. You build the engines, and we'll steer the ship." My mother chimed in, placing her hand on mine. "This is a chance for us to come together, Daniel, to build a true family legacy. Imagine the 3 of you men working side by side. Leo, for his part, looked me in the eye with a sincerity I had never seen from him before. "I was wrong about you, bro," he said. "What you've built is incredible. I want to help. I can sell this. I can make us a household name." Every alarm bell in my head was screaming. The years of neglect, of sacrifice, of being treated as a second-class citizen, it all warned me to run. But there was another voice, a quieter one. It was the voice of the 10-year-old boy who just wanted his dad to be proud. The voice of the 18-year-old who just wanted to be seen as an equal to his brother. They were finally offering me a seat at the table. They were finally acknowledging my worth. I told myself it was a strategic decision, that their connections and experience could be useful. But the truth is, I was starved for their approval, and they were serving it up on a golden platter. I agreed. We incorporated the company. For a token investment of their savings, I gave them board seats and a controlling interest. I made my brother the COO. I thought I was finally fixing my family. In reality, I had just handed them the weapon they would use to try and destroy me. For the first year, it actually felt like it was working. The family united in purpose. We moved out of the garage and into a sleek, modern office. My father, as chairman, used his old boy network to get us meetings I couldn't have secured on my own. Leo, as COO, was undeniably charming. He could walk into a room and command attention, dazzling potential clients with buzzwords he'd learned in business school, while I sat quietly in the background, ready to answer the actual technical questions. We were landing bigger and bigger contracts. I was working 18-hour days, leading my new team of developers, constantly innovating and improving Nexus. I was so focused on the work, so caught up in the dream of our shared success, that I chose to ignore the warning signs. The first sign was the spending. Leo insisted he needed a top-of-the-line German sedan as a company car to project an image of success. My father hired an expensive design firm to furnish the executive offices with mahogany desks and leather chairs. Meanwhile, I was still driving my 10-year-old sedan and working on a folding table because I kept redirecting my furniture budget to buy more server capacity. When I questioned the expenses, my father would dismiss my concerns. "You don't understand branding, Daniel. You have to spend money to make money." The second sign was the narrative. Leo became the face of the company. A local business magazine ran a feature on us, calling Leo a young visionary shaking up the tech world. My father was quoted extensively about his guiding business philosophy. My name was mentioned once, in passing, as the head of product. They were slowly, methodically, writing me out of my own story. The final, undeniable sign came late one night when I was walking past the main conference room. My father and Leo were inside, celebrating a new contract Leo had supposedly closed. I heard Leo laughing. "The client loved the pitch," he said, "but Daniel is becoming a real bottleneck. He keeps talking about technical limitations and development cycles." I froze, my hand on the door. Then I heard my father's voice, calm and confident. "Don't worry about Daniel. He's the engine, but we own the car." He served his purpose by getting us this far. Once the company is valuable enough, we can hire a dozen guys just like him. He's brilliant, but he's not irreplaceable. That one word, irreplaceable, was like a bucket of ice water. It washed away any lingering sentiment, any shred of hope I had for my family. In that moment, listening to them plot my disposal from the company I built, I didn't feel sadness. I felt a profound and chilling clarity. I finally saw them for exactly what they were. Parasites who saw my success not as something to be proud of, but as a resource to be consumed before moving on. I didn't confront them. I didn't burst into the room. I simply backed away from the door, went back to my own office, and started planning. They had made a critical error. They had mistaken my desire for their approval for weakness. The next morning, I didn't go to the office. I went to see a lawyer, not the friendly family attorney who had helped my father structure the deal that gave him control, but a corporate litigator with a reputation for being a shark. I laid out every document on her conference room table, the articles of incorporation, the shareholder agreements, and, most importantly, the massive stack of paperwork from our first major business loan. We spent hours going through it, line by line. I was looking for a crack, any small advantage. What we found was a canyon. Well, Daniel, my lawyer, Ms. Croft, said, a slow smile spreading across her face. Your father may think he's a master of the universe, but he signs contracts like a novice. Do you know what this is? She pointed to a section in the addendum to our loan agreement. It was the key person clause, a standard insurance policy the bank required, naming me as the key person whose departure would jeopardize the company. My father and Leo had seen it as a mere formality. But they missed the rider I had my own lawyer insert before the final signing, back when a small part of me still suspected this might happen. The rider I'd slipped in expanded the definition of a triggering event from just death or disability. It also included the involuntary termination of the key person's executive role by the board. Ms. Croft leaned back in her chair. They've built a guillotine and put their own necks in it, she said. The moment they vote to fire you, they trigger this clause, and according to the terms you wrote, you get to choose the outcome. She explained that I could either demand an immediate buyout of my shares at a pre-agreed, massively inflated valuation that would bankrupt the company, or I could execute option B. Option B, she said, her eyes gleaming, allows the wrongfully terminated key person to purchase all other shareholder stakes for the price of their original capital investment. My father and Leo's 51% controlling stake was tied to their investment of $50,000. The company was now worth over $20 million. They called me replaceable, I said, feeling a cold smile of my own. Let's prepare the paperwork for option B. They're about to learn what happens when you try to remove a load-bearing wall. The next few weeks were a masterclass in self-control. Walking back into that office, I had to swallow my rage and wear the mask of a defeated man. I let my shoulders slump. I spoke less in meetings. I stopped objecting when Leo made promises to clients that I knew our software couldn't keep. I just nodded and said I'd see what my team could do. To them, it looked like I had finally accepted my place. My quiet compliance was seen as a weakness, and it made them careless. Leo, emboldened, promised a massive new client, a level of data integration that was technologically impossible in the timeframe he gave. When I flagged it in an email, my father replied with a curt, "Make it happen." I saved the email, and when the integration failed spectacularly a month later, costing us the 7-figure contract, I said nothing. I just added the email chain to a growing dossier I labeled mismanagement. While Leo was failing upwards and my father was whining and dining venture capitalists, I was preparing for war. My life became a series of clandestine meetings with Ms. Croft. We prepared the share purchase agreements, the new articles of incorporation, the termination letters. We opened a new set of corporate bank accounts that only I controlled. I funneled $50,000 of my own money into one of them, the exact amount I would need to buy them out. I quietly met with my 3 most senior developers, the ones who had been with me since the garage days. I didn't tell them the whole plan, but I assured them that their jobs were safe and that big changes were coming that would put the company back on the right track. I secured their loyalty. They were my team. My father and brother had executives and board members. I had the people who actually built the product. The final summons came on a Tuesday afternoon, an email from my father's secretary. Mandatory board meeting, Thursday, Talent AM, agenda to be discussed. This was it. The VCs my father had been courting were getting serious, and he needed to clean house before they signed the papers. He needed to officially remove the bottleneck and install Leo as the new CEO. He needed to get rid of the replaceable part. I calmly typed back a one-word reply. Confirmed. I spent the next day making sure every piece of my plan was perfectly in place. As I walked towards that boardroom on Thursday morning, I felt no fear. They thought they were about to fire an employee. They had no idea they were about to hand their entire world over to their greatest creation and their worst nightmare. I took my seat at the polished mahogany table. The air was thick with the same smug satisfaction I had felt before. Only this time I understood its source. It was the thrill of the kill. My father, sitting at the head of the table, cleared his throat and began to read from a prepared statement. He spoke of new strategic imperatives and the need for a more market-facing leadership team. It was all meaningless corporate jargon designed to sound professional while they slid a knife in my back. He didn't look at me once. And so, he concluded, his voice filled with fake solemnity. With a heavy heart, but with an eye toward the future, I call for a vote on the motion to remove Daniel from his position as Chief Executive Officer and from the Board of Directors. Leo's I was loud and proud. My mother's was a soft but firm I. My father then looked at me, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. The motion carries. The board has voted. You're out. It was the exact moment I had been waiting for. They expected me to protest, to get angry, to be defeated. Instead, I simply reached down and opened my briefcase. I pulled out a thin file folder and slid a single document to the center of the table. You're right. The board has voted, I said, my voice even and calm. And in doing so, you have just triggered Article 7, Section 4 of the Key Person Clause you all signed 2 years ago. My father's brow furrowed in confusion. Leo snatched the paper. His lips moved as he read it, his confident smirk slowly melting into a mask of disbelief. What is this? Involuntary termination? He stammered, looking at my father for help. It means, I explained, leaning forward, that by firing me, you have created a triggering event, one that gives me, the key person, 2 options. Option A, I can demand an immediate payout of my shares at a valuation contractually set at 10 times our last funding round. That comes to roughly $25 million, which would instantly bankrupt the company and default on all our loans. The color drained from my mother's face. My father stared at me, speechless. But I don't want to destroy my company, I continued, letting the horror sink in. I just want what's rightfully mine. I pulled a second document from my folder, along with a certified check, and slid them across the table. Which is why I am choosing option B. This option allows me to purchase all other shares, your shares, for the price of your initial capital investment, $50,000. I tapped the check. The transfer is effective immediately upon this vote. As of 30 seconds ago, I am the sole owner and only board member of this corporation. Your services are no longer required. You're all fired. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the air conditioning. The 3 of them just stared at the check. Then at me, their faces a kaleidoscope of confusion, shock, and dawning horror. My father was the first to break. He slammed his fist on the table, his face turning a deep, blotchy red. "This is absurd," he roared. "A trick! We'll sue you into oblivion. You ungrateful child, after everything I did to build this company? The lie was so reflexive, he probably half believed it himself. Leo, seeing his future of unearned wealth evaporate, rounded on him. You built this. You signed the papers, Dad. You told me it was all handled. How could you miss this? Then came my mother's turn. The tears started, as they always did, when logic failed her. Daniel, please, she sobbed, reaching a hand across the table. You can't do this. We're your family. Think of your father's reputation. Think of your brother. The classic appeal to my sense of duty, the one that had worked for 20 years, fell on deaf ears. I felt nothing but a cold, hard sense of finality. I didn't yell back. I didn't argue. I had learned that you cannot win an argument with people who don't live in reality. Instead, I picked up the phone on the conference table and pressed the extension for building security. Good morning. This is Daniel, I said into the receiver, my voice steady. I need 2 officers to come to the main boardroom immediately. We have 3 individuals who are no longer employed here and are refusing to leave the premises. The blood drained from my father's face. My mother's sobs turned into a gasp of disbelief. 2 uniformed guards appeared at the glass door a minute later. They looked at me, and I gave them a simple nod toward my family. These 3 need to be escorted out. They are not to be allowed back in the building. The commotion was quiet, but humiliating. My father sputtered about lawyers, my mother pleaded, and Leo just stared at me with wide, empty eyes as the guards firmly guided them to the door. The entire office, a sea of silent, watching faces, saw it all through the glass walls. They watched the chairman, the COO, and their matriarch get walked out of the company they thought they owned. As the door closed behind them, I stepped out of the boardroom and looked at my real team. There's been a change in leadership, I announced to the silent room. The company is back in the hands of its founder. The era of wasteful spending is over. Our focus is back on the product. Now, let's get to work. My father, true to his word, tried to fight. A lawsuit was filed within the week, a rambling, desperate document accusing me of fraud, coercion, and elder abuse. It was a pathetic attempt to bully me through the legal system, a final, flailing grasp for the control he had lost. They hired a lawyer who was a friend from their country club, and the 2 of them made a lot of noise in the press about a son's cruel betrayal. I let them have their moment. My victory wasn't going to be won in the media. It was going to be finalized in the courts. In front of the judge, their case evaporated in less than an hour. My lawyer, Ms. Croft, didn't even break a sweat. She simply presented the signed, notarized agreements. She showed the board meeting minutes where they had voted to fire me. She showed the key person clause they had all initialed. The judge, a stern woman with no patience for nonsense, looked at my father with unconcealed disdain. You're an experienced businessman, are you not? She asked. He mumbled a yes. Then you are expected to read the contracts you sign. You made a bad deal out of arrogance and negligence. That is not this court's problem. She dismissed the case with prejudice and, in a final crushing blow, ordered them to pay all of my legal fees. That was the end. Their fight was over. The $50,000 I had paid them was almost entirely consumed by their own lawyers' bills. The house I grew up in, the stage for all their grand performances of status, went on the market. The luxury cars were repossessed. My mother's lavish parties came to an abrupt end. Their world, built on a foundation of my sacrificed dreams and the company's revenue, had crumbled into dust. Back at Nexus, it was like the sun had come out after a long storm. I took the bloated budgets for executive travel and client entertainment and converted them into raises and performance bonuses for my actual employees. Morale skyrocketed. We fixed the bugs Leo's incompetence had created and won back the clients he had alienated. 6 months later, I closed the venture capital deal my father had been chasing, but I did it on my own terms, raising $30 million while retaining full control. The company they had nearly run into the ground was now thriving beyond their wildest dreams, all because the one replaceable part had refused to be replaced. I didn't hear from them directly after the lawsuit. The silence was a relief. Another year passed. Nexus grew into a force in the tech industry. We hired hundreds of employees, moved into a new custom-built campus, and our software became the gold standard. I was no longer the boy in the garage. I was the CEO of a 9-figure company. I had built a new family, a team of brilliant, loyal people who respected me for my vision and my work, not for what they could take from me. I had finally found the validation I once craved, but it came from within and from the people I had chosen to surround myself with, not the ones assigned to me by birth. One Saturday afternoon, I was at a large home improvement store buying a new grill. As I was walking down an aisle, a man in a bright orange vest approached me. "Can I help you find anything, sir?" he asked in a tired, monotone voice. I looked up, and my blood ran cold. It was my father. He was thinner, and the arrogant fire in his eyes had been replaced by a hollow, defeated look. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by a cheap uniform. He didn't recognize me at first, and then he did. A flash of shock, then deep, burning shame crossed his face. He quickly looked down at the floor and mumbled, "Sorry to bother you," before shuffling away. The man who saw himself as a titan of industry was now making minimum wage, telling people where to find plumbing supplies. A few months later, I got a call from a CEO of another tech company, one of our partners. "Hey, Daniel," he said, "this is a bit awkward, but your brother just applied for a junior sales position here. He gave a great interview, very charming, but his resume is a black hole after he left Nexus. I thought I'd do my due diligence and call you." I paused, then gave the most honest and damning reference I could. Leo's employment with my company was terminated for performance-related issues. I said calmly, "I cannot offer a recommendation." I heard later that Leo didn't get the job. The golden child, stripped of my success to stand on, was revealed to be nothing more than an empty suit. I felt no joy in their downfall, only a profound sense of equilibrium. They had built their lives on top of me, and when I finally stood up, they had nothing left to stand on. The final ghost of my past appeared on a rainy Tuesday evening. I came home from work to find my mother waiting under the awning of my apartment building. She looked older, smaller. The designer clothes she used to wear had been replaced by a simple, worn coat. The confident, cutting woman who had orchestrated the theft of my future was gone, replaced by someone who looked frail and desperate. It was another performance, I knew, but this one was more tragic than the others. She saw me and her face crumpled. She didn't rage like my father or charm like my brother. She just pleaded. "Daniel," she began, her voice trembling, "I had to see you. Your father? His spirit is broken. He barely leaves his little apartment. And Leo is a wreck. He can't hold down a job." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. The same tears she had used to manipulate me my whole life. "We made terrible mistakes. I see that now. I was wrong. But we are still your family. You are all we have left. Can't you find it in your heart to help us? Just a little to get us by. For the sake of family." For a moment, the 10-year-old boy inside me wanted to feel pity. But he was long gone. I looked at the woman who had caused me so much pain and felt nothing but a quiet, final resolve. Family? I asked, my voice not angry, just tired. A family is supposed to nurture you, support you, and believe in you. You did none of those things. You treated me like a line item in your budget, a resource to be exploited for Leo's benefit. That isn't family. That's a hostile takeover. She flinched. This wasn't a mistake, Mother, I continued, the rain falling around us. It was a series of choices. You chose to take my savings for a video game. You chose to take my college fund for Leo's tuition. You chose to steal my company. You called me replaceable. Those weren't mistakes. They were your values in action. I reached into my wallet, but not for money. I took out a pen and a business card and wrote a phone number on the back. I will not give you money. The Bank of Daniel is permanently closed. I handed her the card. That is the number for the State Workforce Development Office. They can help you and Dad find jobs, and Leo too. That is the only help you will ever get from me again. I turned and walked into my building, and for the first time, I didn't look back.